Okay. Get my notes here. All right. This is George and Sophia in 1912. And now some pronunciation or translation to George in Polish, a lot of them pronounced it Jura, but and that starts with a J, by the way. In this case, his name was officially written in Polish as Wojciech. And he was born June 11th, 1876, to Stanislav and Mariana in Siedliska. And that was an area of Poland that bounced back and forth between being owned by Poland and Austria at various times. Sophia Medrick was born April 21st, 1878, in Dobrzyń, Poland. And it was also in the Siedliska area. But they did not know each other until they got to the United States. And George got here, probably there's some confusion about when he actually got here, but I'm pretty sure it was 1895. And he worked in and met and married Sophia in Whiteville, Pennsylvania, August 5th, 1897. Understand, he worked in the coal mines and she worked in a garment factory, and they met on the railroad tracks because the roads were too muddy, and that was the only place you could walk without getting all muddy. And so there they are, 1897. In 1898, the oldest son Walter was born in Whiteville. They moved to Chicago in 1900. John was born. That was another son. In 1901, they moved to Dietz. And what we need to do is move this over to, and this was Kuzaraville. And going around, I think, can you see my little arrow there? Mm-hmm. Okay. That little building there was called the Delco House. It had a 62-volt electric plant in there. They had the first electricity in the area, and they believe that they bought this one-cylinder generator from the Sheridan Inn. It didn't even have a radiator on it; just had a cooling pot that you just kept poured water in. It was one-cylinder thing. It was noisy as heck. And that was one of the reasons that the Sheridan Inn got rid of their generator, because they had a 10 o'clock curfew. Helen can testify to that. Because the thing was so noisy, it kept everybody awake. And they figured they wanted to go to sleep with heck little lights. And so they used that until commercial power showed up there. If you look right there next to that Delco house, there's a 1928 Model A Ford Coupe. My first car. There's a foundation there, and that house originally came from Manchester. It was one of the houses that housed the people that worked for the tie camps, probably some of the supervisors. And at this point, we moved it into town so my grandmother could stay in it over on Val Vista Street. That house is still there. And she was living in the big house, which is here. But while that house that we were staying in was moved, we stayed in this one that's behind the trees here. That's the saloon. Now this is interesting, because the old Higby Road crossed the tracks back a ways, went down in front of the saloon, and went right over the hill there to Monarch, until they built the bridges and Highway 87 was built, and that was the only way you could get to the mining camps, actually. And it was real handy, because as you can see here, Goose Creek is flooding. And it would go down during the night, and in the morning it was, you could cross it. So this is a real handy place for people to stay in the saloon until the water went down. And then you could go across the creek. The big house had this addition on top here was another building that was actually slid on top of the original house on skids. and made the second story. There's a smokehouse back here. There's a butcher shop in here, calf shed. And back under this roof here is an ice house. There's a 3-car garage here. This long building that's in these trees here was the baker shop. There were 3 big ovens in there. Built onto it was the second-hand store. When miners moved out, they sold everything, like their washboards and their chairs and tables and whatever else. And then Grandpa would buy them, and then other miners would move in, he'd resell the stuff to them. There was a blacksmith shop behind that, and then there were other houses back here that miners stayed in, plus a granary and a few other things. The miners that were staying there worked at the Star Mine later on, and this is further on down in the history here. We'll move on. Maybe there we go. This is another view of Kuzaraville. There's the Model A Ford. There's a view of the saloon, and you see the default front is out here in front, so it would face the road. And there's the gas pump. This is the baker shop. There's the ice house, and so on. The only building that's still there, go back, is this one here, this 3-car garage, and it was made out of railroad ties, so it's pretty stout. The big house was built onto and around, and it's buried inside of a larger structure that's there now, but all the other buildings that were there are now gone. And here we go. This is my dad and mother, my grandfather George, grandmother Sophia, and Grandpa George's younger brother Joe, and his wife Rosie, and I don't know who this guy is here, but I'm sure that it was taken in Roundup, Montana, because that's where Joe was. And this is part of the story, the sequence of events here, things that happened. These guys here were Fresnel, and I think this is Sophie's sister, Catherine, and he was probably in the Austrian army, it looks to me like. All right, this is Grandpa's store in Windham, Montana, and you kind of wonder, well, how come, if he's in Kuzaraville, how come he's in Windham, Montana? Well, Uncle Joe came down about, let's see here, 1908 or so. Let's see where we're at here. Let's go back in time. 1901, Andrew was born in Dietz. 1903, Joe was born in Dietz. 1905, Mary was born in Dietz. 1905, moved to Dietz 5 to work there. 1906, Stanley was born and in a converted barn. In 1906, George was injured in a mine accident and decided to go to bartending. And he worked for the guy who had the saloon there, and his name was Hecht. So he bought the Hecht property in Dietz 5, and it was between Dietz 5 and Dietz 7. He built the bakery, hired a baker by the name of Zondelitz, and then Mike Sikora. The interesting thing about Mike Sikora is he claims to have found the lost cabin mine, and he had a map to it written on or traced on the wall in the bakery with a note that said 23 trees. That's not a reliable landmark. So trees die and fall over, and no one could figure out where he was referring to. His map was rather crude, and I don't think anybody's ever found the lost cabin mine. Maybe he just thought he found it, but anyway, he had a map on the wall that said that he found it. The other thing, I have to question his veracity, because he He was trading bread for moonshine. And he actually died of lead poisoning. So the bakery took a hit.
Was that ingested or through the air?
I don't know. But in the meantime, right around that time, around 1908 or so, the mines were starting to shut down, and it looks like business was dropping off. And Joe said things are roaring in Roundup, Montana. So what George did was he leased Kuzaraville back to Hecht to operate everything. So the bakery was there, the ice house, the butcher shop, and everything else. And they moved up to Roundup, Montana, where he bought into a place called the 3-Star Saloon. And it just didn't catch on, and Grandma didn't like the liquor business. So he went ahead and marshaled his resources, and he went in with a fellow by the name of Dunsmore, and he heard that the mines were really going in Windham, Montana, and they moved up there, and he dug a basement and put up a 2-story building, and that's the one that you see on the screen up here. I don't know who the other guy is, but Grandpa George is right there. Well, somewhere down the line, that Mr. Dunsmore decided that he would just go ahead and take off in the middle of the night with all the liquid assets and let Grandpa hold the bag for the all the debts that were owed on the store. And he had to sell off everything, and he moved back to Kuzaraville, and that was in 1918. Well, let's find out here. He bought the saloon in Roundup in 1914. Okay. Before he did that, however, in 1910, between 1910 and 1912, he had made enough money from his various enterprises that he and Sophie went back to Poland. Yeah. And the interesting thing about that was on their trip over there on the ship, I believe the ship was called the Bremen, they saw the other ships looking for the survivors of the Titanic, which went down in the Atlantic over there. So in the winter of 1918, with only his truck and with the clothes they had on their back, they moved back to Kuzaraville, but the lease was still good for Mr. Hecht, and it was still in force. Now, when Grandpa George moved to Kuzaraville and started that up over there, Hecht was in the house, and it was the only place to live. So Grandpa, being a pretty easygoing guy, says, well, we'll just live in a tent. So they put up a wooden platform, and they put up a tent there. And this is what they came back. The winter of 1918 was really bad. And they lived in that dang tent with all those kids through the winter of 1918 until the lease was up and Hecht moved out. And let's see, 1915, Helen was born. 1916, Henry was born. I skipped my dad. He was born in 1913. And the last daughter was born, Charlotte, in 1919. So he set up a retail grocery business, and that truck that you see there was what he moved around to the mines with to peddle groceries to the miners, and he also had a second-hand store. There's Grandpa, and I think Sophie's brother and 3 of Sophie's sisters that we're not sure. It was taken in Pennsylvania, however. There's George and Sophie. That's 1925. And I don't know where they are in that picture. There's the family. This has got to be the 1930s. I think I have a sheet here that might tell me here. And this is Charlotte. And let's see, there's Stanley. And this has got to be my dad right here. And this is Henry. And the interesting thing about this family is the two oldest brothers were 16 and 18 years old, respectively, and they were in World War I. This boy here was an aviator in World War II. That's a pretty good spread for them kids. There's another one, a little bit further down the line. There's Charlotte now. She's probably about 16 or 17 years old there. That there is 1959. Grandpa's no longer in the picture. He passed away in 1950. There's Sophia. And as many of the kids as survived. There's Sophie's sister. There's the 57 Ford. There's 1959. That's all of them that could show up. This is out on Tongue River at the Tongue River Hall. And I'm not sure what year that is. I believe this is Fritz Mintock. This is Bill Mintock's brother. No. That's Victor Eckley. Okay, sorry. Anyway, I'd like to have that car back there. That's a pretty neat old thing. There's Mary Mintock in the Acme store, the Jim Barillo's Acme store. And these are some of the Presnell family. They were related to Sophia, and I believe they were in Canada. There's my dad at 18 years old. Looks pretty happy, doesn't he? And there he is on a haystack. Okay, interesting thing about this haystack. You know how, notice how that's kind of sliced off there like that? You know how we did that? Now some people say a hay knife is the way to go. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those things, but it's a lot of work. So what we would do is threw some barbed wire over the haystack, tied an engine block to have it strung out a ways, tied an engine block to the end of it, grabbed a hold of the other end with a tractor and just dragged it across there. And it would go about halfway down through the stack. And then we'd take the engine block and hook it on the other end out there, bring the tractor back, and hook the bolt the other way. Barbed wire to cut that stack right in half. There's a star mine. Not a very good picture. You'll see a wagon right here, and the team that was pulling it is right here. Because if you turn the coal loose out of this chute right there and dump it in that wagon, that team would end up with a wagon in Nebraska. They wouldn't stand for that, pardon the pun. Back up here, you see an old truck right here. There's a boiler. Okay, we have an interesting story about that. Grandpa bought that thing, that mine that was started by a fellow by the name of Steve Kutcher, 1926. And it was just a wagon mine, and they used horses to pull the cars out. And the guy had started it wrong. Grandpa knew all about mining, so he started a new drift. And he wanted to modernize it, and he had been talking to Uncle Joe and Roundup, and Joe says, I know where you can get some power for that mine. It was a steam tractor. So Grandpa sent my dad and a fellow by the name of Steve Zarney up on the train, and they went out to Roundup, Montana, and they got that steam tractor and they drove it to Sheridan. It took them 2 weeks. They had to pull a cart to carry their wood, and they had to go dip buckets in the creek to get the water for the darn thing. Nobody let them go across the bridges because they're afraid to fall in. And they finally got it up to the mine down there, and they took the wheels off of it, set it up there, and it ran a generator and an air compressor for the mine. So they weren't using horses to to pull the cars out. They had an endless cable, and it was an interesting thing. It just ran down the drift. We'll discuss that here in a minute. And then you had a little clamp that you could, as the cable went by, and you hook it to the car, and when you put it on there, it would turn sideways and it would drag the car up. When you got where you were going, you could hit it with a hammer and just knock it off the line and push the car the rest of the way if you wanted to. It was pretty ingenious. Okay, that's the way they used to pull stuff out of the mine. There's your horses and your miners. These pictures are from Black Diamonds of Sheridan. There's Monarch and the Monarch pole tipple. And there's Uncle Stanley with his example of miner's hats. Now, this one here is, he's got a candle. There's a lot of coal dust in mine. Okay? That was a little bit dangerous to have an open flame like that, but that's what they had. And you imagine you got this candle on your hat and you sneezed and it went out. Now you have to figure out how to light the damn thing in the dark. Anyway, this one here is an oil lamp. This one here is a carbide light. And I was very familiar with those. We used to use those up in Tug River Cave. And the reflector is concave. And the neat thing about that is you fill the top full of carbide, or at the bottom full of carbide, and then the top half of that lamp had a water vessel in it. And it would drip water down and make acetylene gas. And then it would flow up through the little aperture in there and burn. So in order to start it, that reflector had a little thing just like a regular cigarette lighter, the little spark wheel on it and everything. So the really neat thing to do is to start your acetylene first and let it drip, and you could actually feel it coming out of the nozzle. And you hold your hand on the reflector, and you collect a lot of gas in there. And then you hit the spark, and you go boom. And the people weren't watching. People are nervous in mines anyway. It was always fun to watch people jump. Anyway, and then this is an electric light here, and you had to wear the battery, of course, for that, which was a considerable improvement and less of a fire hazard. There's a lot of methane in those things. Okay, here's your drawings. People say mine shaft. This is a mine shaft. It goes straight down, and then you got your drifts going each way, and to promote an air flow, you have a little shaft that was bored here to let some air go through. Slope is what you went into the hill with, and at some point in there you'd make a little air shaft up there like that. And here's the other configuration. Here's what it looked like in the mine, and this is a drift. This is your slope going in. This is a drift off to the side that's been boarded up because it would collect methane. And this would be the entrance, and you'd come back in the mine. And the proper way to do this is to go as far as you think you want to go with your slope, okay? And then you start mining on your way out and boarding things up as you come out. The Union Pacific Railroad was in a hurry to get their coal for their trains down there at Hanna, and they started mining right off the entrance with these things. And they collected some gas in there. They killed about 50 miners because of that deal. Had a big explosion. But this is the way you run your drift off to the side. You go clear down as far as you want to go, and then you mine out a room. Leave 40 feet, mine out a room, and so on. And then they're staggered. And the result, on top of the ground, whoop, let's keep going here. How come I'm there? Okay, this is one of the side trips we're taking here. Here's what the railroad did. This is not a regular creek channel here. It used to go, this is the old country nightclub on the way to Decker. The river used to run around this way. And the railroad just cut it straight out so they wouldn't have to build two bridges. And you'll see those again and again through the country. Okay, if you look here, you'll see these little depressions. If you're on the ground, they look rather random. When you see them from the air, you can see the rooms that caved in and where the slope was and where the drifts are. I think I may have another picture of that here, I'm not sure. There. You can see how the regular pattern, and you can tell right where the slope was and where the drifts and the rooms were by where they caved in. There's a better picture right there. Pretty neat when you see it in the air. Hayloft up there, but this is the front, and this was the ice house. And in it, to insulate the walls, they had a double wall in there, and they put coal slack in there. And one day I happened to be going by the back of the barn over there, and it was the middle of summertime. We shouldn't have had any stoves going. And I told my dad, I said, I think I smell coal smoke. It had caught on fire in the wall. And we managed to get all that stuff out of there and actually save the building. There's a 3-car garage that's built out of railroad ties. It's the only building actually still on the place out there. Dr. Sturbins has the place now. When my father was killed out at the power plant, and everything, my mother couldn't hang on to the place. None of us boys were in such a position that we could take it over, so she had to sell the place, and Sturbins bought it.
Mike, where'd they cut ice for the ice house?
Okay, just downstream, they put a bunch of big rocks. They hauled them in there and put them in the riverbed, and then they would drop planks in from rock to rock to form a pool. Later on, when the ice business was done, they pulled the planks back out. Sometimes the river didn't form, and they got that ice right out of Goose Creek there. This is one of the houses. A fellow by the name of Anton Barron lived in there, and I was reading one of the Sheridan Media has that thing, a look back in time, and they had a note in there from Monarch. Let's see, Mina and Flora Barron in Monarch. There was some sort of social function. That would be Anton's 2 daughters, and they came back once to visit him. George Ketsko lived in here, and then, oh, there's my old car. And this was another house. Just on the other side of this house was one that Jura Maljurik lived in. Jura is a word for George. Mal is small. So Maljurik is Little George. So his name was literally George Little George. And this is a 49 Buick with 47 Packard grill. You know, it's a pretty good old car. And various people lived in this house. One was an interesting fellow. His name was Otto Goins, and he didn't have a nose. He was bit off in a fight in a gold field in Alaska. Anyway, there's the kids again. Okay. Now, here's something you'll see. Here's this chain hanging down off of the front axle. Okay, there's another view of this cart. And I don't know what in the world we were thinking.
Which one was
Now
you,
this,
Mike?
huh?
Which one was you?
This is Dennis, David, and Stephen. I'm not on there.
You're not on there.
I was on it at one point, and we had my Uncle Walter and his kids were living there. Okay. We could pull this thing around with this chain, and somebody could sit on there and they could actually drive it. Okay. So we took it clear up the hill behind the house. I'll tell you right now, you can't steer one of those things with a chain hooked to the axle. We just had the awfulest wreck if you ever saw it. Just tore that thing all to pieces. Threw kids all over the landscape. Not a very good thing. And in this picture here, this is the highway presently. Rice Ranch is back toward Sheridan there. Do you see this notch on the hill over here? Okay, that's the Higby Road that came down, went across the tracks, and went right out through here and over to Monarch. And there's Kuzaraville. Now here is a post. Now you can't see what's hooked on that post, but there's a cable. It goes across the river. And right there, downstream from the place, was the first bridge across Goose Creek out that way, and it actually took over from the ford that used to be by the saloon, and people could drive past our place and turn and go across this wooden bridge and then reconnect to the Higby Road and go on up to Monarch. Okay, there's the smokehouse. All right, see this contraption right here? That's the cable car. And just two wheels on a deal and a piece of plank. And what you do is, there was a platform there, you could climb up a couple steps, you could set that thing back on the track, and then somebody would sit on that platform, because you could go get the cows on this thing, because they were across the river. And you could holler at them all you wanted to, but they'd just stand there and look at you. Somebody had to chase them across. So somebody'd get down there and there's rope hanging on the bottom of that thing. And you take off and you just run like mad, and the car would go across the river. And if you ran hard enough, the car would actually hit the post on the other side and throw whoever was on it off. And then hopefully derail and stay there, instead of rolling back out into the middle of the creek. And then when you got the cows chased across, you could get on, and then it was downhill coming across, you could get on there and give yourself a push and come home. The nice thing about this thing here was just great. It was really nice to just walk by there and open that door and go in and go, man, that smells good. The whole floor of that thing was just greasy from all the Polish sausage we used to smoke in that thing. And there it is. There's the sausage, man. Yeah, look at that. Mm-hmm. And there's the front of the old saloon. It didn't even have a name. It was just a saloon. Grandpa turned it into a store later on. And I have a picture in here. I believe this is what's coming up. No, that's the back of the house. This is that piece that was added on to the top over there. There's the steam train going by Kuzaraville. And you can see right there, without the trees in the way, that little two-room shack that was slid up on top. Okay, somewhere in here. Ah, there it is. Okay, Grandpa's ledger. I don't know if I can blow that up or not.
Down at the bottom.
Is there a magnifying glass or somewhere on that thing? Yeah. Oh, there we go. This is, Bilus. It didn't say Kubilus, but he didn't put the first name on either. Just in case the revenuers got a hold of it, you wouldn't know who this was. And there's like, if you read that, there's 2 cases of bottles, 5 feet of hose, a whole bunch of corks, and some more bottles. And another page with the guy's name on it has a lot of yeast and a lot, 25 pounds of sugar.
What's the
So,
date? What year?
that one there was, it had to be 1923. So, yeah. If the revenuers had ever got a hold of Grandpa's store ledger, they'd knew who all the moonshiners were. And we're back to the front. Now, Grandpa was quite a guy. He was quite a character, and he would a lot of times when we were having a party, people would be around betting and everything, and he'd go, "You guys," he says, "I'm gonna bet you." He says, "You guys," he says, "I'm gonna bet you." He says, "I can take these legs and walk on this ceiling." And so he'd start collecting the money. And they'd say, "No, you can't do that." He says, "Yes, I can. I can take these legs and walk right on the ceiling." So then the bets are all in. He'd get up and they'd be all ready for this. And he would take the legs and walk on the ceiling. He didn't specify which ones. And I have to tell you this story about Grandpa because he had a hobby herd that after he retired from the coal mine and everything, and I'd ride with him up. He had an old 37 International pickup. 2 stories about Grandpa. There was some guys that were camped on the state lease up there. One guy was, his name was Shambuska, and he made rhubarb wine. He had quite a little setup up there, lived in a dugout and everything, and these old miners would walk across country and go up there and drink rhubarb wine in that dugout. It was nice and cool. And then they'd come out there and heat and try to walk back home, so none of them could drive. And they'd pass out sagebrush. And so Grandpa, it'd be time to go get them, and he had me ride on the fender and hang on to the headlight so we wouldn't run over any of them. And we'd pick up the bodies and haul them home. And then we were up there one time, and we had this little game we always played. I don't know if any of you have been out to Beatty Gulch and then the Three Poles area. And from out there, it's a couple miles back to the highway, but the road goes up and down a couple of hills and just keeps going down. And at the bottom, there's a couple corners. And we'd always turn the engine off on the truck and save a little gas. And roll down one hill, up the next, and over the top, and everything. And one day, Grandpa looked at me and he gave me a big grin and he says, "Today we go all the way to highway." And he got clear back and he took a run at that first hill. Man, we went sailing over the top and down the next one and up over the top of the next one. I think we actually left the ground, got to the bottom, and that old truck was really going. We fishtailed around the first corner and lost it on the second corner and rolled the truck. And it was laying there on its side, and Grandpa was on top of me. And he pushed the door open, got out, pulled me out of there, and he said, "You all right?" I go, "Yeah." And then, so, he got up, he was probably about a little over 70 years old. Got a hold of that truck, just backed up to it, flipped it back on its wheels. He was a stout boy. And then we picked up all the tools that were scattered out to save justice from the back. So we're driving back home really slow. He looked over at me and he said, "You all right?" I said, "Yeah." He still had the store too, you know. He said, "You want some candy?" And I said, "Well, yeah." We drive a little further and he goes, "You want some pop?" Yeah, that's great. So when we came home, we came over the tracks into the place, and we're driving really slow, and he didn't park in his regular place, and Grandma's radar kicked in. She took and made a circle around the truck, saw them dents, and she started in on him all the way to the house. I never got my candy, and I never got my car. So we had a lot of fun. It's a wonder any of us boys have all of our fingers and toes and eyes and stuff, because Grandpa had a lot of black powder and dynamite, and so did the guy that was just up the draw from us that had the Custer Coal Company. And so we learned how to use dynamite, and strictly experimental. And I had one picture. I tried to find it, actually, of an explosion of breaking coal loose in the strip mine up there, and I took it with an old box camera, and I could not find that photograph anywhere. But there's the white puff of smoke where the explosion first started, and while I'm winding the next film up, this big chunk of coal came off and bounced off the top of this pile and landed right on the top of this truck that was parked behind the coal pile for safekeeping, and just crushed it in. So we got pretty good at that. The guy that abandoned the mine up there left everything in the powder house, and he had this ditching dynamite. I don't know if you know what that stuff is.
Yeah.
It's pretty damn hot. In fact, a lot of the stuff on the bottom of the box just dripped. I mean, it was pretty wild. And you could take it. I got to where I blew beaver dams for people all down Tongue River and old rices and stuff. And you take a pole and poke a hole in the beaver dam right at the bottom and start pushing these sticks in there. And about 4 or 5 would usually do it. And then get back a little ways and shoot it with a hollow point .22. And you never hear the rifle go off. You pull the trigger and the whole world went up. And it was pretty neat. That just raised the dam right up out of the creek, and the water's run out, and it just tear it all up, and then it's gone. So, but I think that's probably Grandpa's enterprises with his store and his coal mine and everything else. I had some figures here about how much coal they took out of there at one time, but I must have lost track of it. He employed 15 miners at the height of the operation at Star Mine. It seems like the figure that I saw in there was like 8,000 tons. That's a lot of coal. And the interesting thing about that Star Mine, you see all those deep mines with all those holes all over those hills? I know where the Star Mine is, or was, but there's no cave holes up there. It was in a deep enough vein under there that any subsidence would just be absorbed by the amount of overburden that there was on that. The other thing that's interesting about the coal mines in Sheridan is that most of the roofs that they looked for when they were mining coals, they'd like to find an area where it was either slate or a clay roof. And Sheridan Press Brick and Tile bought that blue clay that came from the coal mines for their brick products out there. And that's one of the reasons I think that there still aren't American bricks. They just couldn't get their hands on that blue clay. It was real handy. And one thing about it, when you mine the coal out, that clay would then dry out and harden and make a pretty good ceiling in there. You didn't need that much timbering to hold the roof up in the mine at that time. Just questions?
I have one story.
Uh-oh.
I used to, of course, go to all kinds of functions out there. Scared me to death when the train came by. I could hear the whistle blow down the track, And all the little kids would run right up the hill to right next to that train. Used to scare me to death when those kids was going to get hurt. Yeah.
Well, now that you remind me of that, I used to stand up on the crossing until the school bus came. And then out of boredom, I was walking on the rail like little kids do. My foot slipped off the rail and went down between the track and the tie. And I couldn't get it out. And the train was coming around the corner. And the engineer saw me. And he was hooting the horn.
Get out of the way.
Yeah, not like the regular crossing thing. And Grandpa heard me. And I don't know how old he was. But he come up there and jerked my foot out of that deal and pulled me out of the way just in time when the train went by. Yeah.
No wonder you were frightened.
You know, I remember my dad hooking the trailer onto our 1927 Whippet car and going to the Star Mine and getting coal.
All right.
And I have no idea where we was at to this day, but I always rode along with him. But I don't know where it was at.
Well, if you go out past the old stockyards and follow the railroad tracks out about 2 miles, and then drive over the tracks to the on the east side of the tracks, that's where it's at.
Yeah.
About almost opposite the rice ranch.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mike. This was really interesting.
All right. Well,
It was great.
I had planned on more stories, you know, and I kind of timed it, and I had it figured out to run about 3 hours, but I cut it down. I've been watching here. This movie is recorded by my Uncle Stanley Kuzara, and it was done from 1937 to 1967. And there's probably, if you're old enough, you may recognize some of the people that are in there. If not, it'll just be a mystery. Apparently they were having lots of fun. And one of the interesting things about the movie is that you'll notice in there were some banquet scenes, and all the men are at one table, all the women are at another table, and the kids at a third table, which is the way they used to do it in the old days. And one of the scenes in there was the George and Sophia's 50th wedding anniversary, and they had lots of people there, and they rolled the beer barrel, wooden beer barrel, up out of the cellar of the saloon, and tapped it, and that was the star of the show there, you might say.